All right, we're recording. Hey, folks, welcome back to Sustainable Design Masterclass. It is December 2nd, 2021. Crazy. 2021, it's the future. And the future is pretty nuts. Last summer, we had epic, insane existential wildfires across BC, California, Oregon. And now it's 6 months later from these massive wildfires. What are we dealing with? We're dealing with massive rains, erosion, entire coastal towns flooding. And so it's this flip side of every summer is existential massive drought and wildfires followed by flooding and erosion. And so we're looking for solutions for how to take on drought, wildfire, floods, erosion risks. And so we want to bring on people who are having deep solutions for how to take on these problems and actually move ourselves towards an environment which is deeply buffered and is restoring ecology back in time and even to a place where we want to live, an ecosystem that has been forgotten, that we're restoring to a place where we can only imagine that over generations that we can develop. These people that we're featuring are the practitioners who are helping us restore the world that we have lost. And so I'm deeply grateful to bring on Neil and Jeff and Javin to show you what is possible to restore our lost ecosystems and how to protect ourselves in a wild, fiery, and flood-filled future. So I had the great opportunity of meeting, I met Neil back at one of the Permaculture Voices, same with I met Javin, and I got to meet Jeff at a Quivera Coalition workshop with the one and only Bill Zedike and Craig Sponholtz back in summer of 2016. And that was so cool seeing this work in action, these human beavers basically repairing creeks and repairing erosion zones. And it was so fascinating seeing this beautiful work take place because it is a really impactful and cheap way that people are restoring entire watersheds. You know, where we think about solutions for drought, billion-dollar desalination plants and huge reservoirs that can be destroyed with an earthquake and cost $100 million to repair. This work is so cheap, it's effective, and it can be infinitely scalable. So they're gonna have some really awesome solutions to share with you all, how you can control erosion, how you can reverse drought, and how you can repair watersheds. So Javin, why don't you take it away? Why don't you introduce some of these fine folks and we'll get started with this webinar.
Thanks so much, Raleigh. I always love your introductions because it sets the stage and it allows people to understand exactly what we're working with. Welcome, everybody. My name is Javin Kirby-Bernakovich. I own and operate All Points Design, a land and life design company out of Canada, but I work internationally in Africa and down in the Caribbean and down in South America. And my work, like Jeff and Neil's, is all about how do we create more diverse, more abundant, and if necessary, more profitable lives and landscapes. What I love about these folks' work is when we're taking a look at this work, it's reimagining how can we be positive forces in the landscape. And Jeff and Neil sent me a publication that they've been working on all about this work. And they sent it to me and I went through it. And what I love about these two practitioners is that they have a high level of professionalism. They have a high level of detail. And it's always straight and forward. And I couldn't help myself. But after I read through their document, provide some feedback, I thought, you know, we should retitle this How Sticks and Stones Can Save the World, or at least your local watershed, because that's what we're looking at when we're taking a look at the erosive potential of not only the precipitable values we're getting, the cloud bursts we're getting, our wets are getting wetter, our dries are getting drier, we're getting alternative forms of precipitation that we don't normally get. We need every single tool in our toolbox, and we need to keep an open mind and an open toolbox so that way we can work with this. What I love specifically about low tech erosion control is it really holds to an adage I have, which is incremental steps to avoid excremental results. And that's what this is all about. It's taking small, slow steps so we don't end up with a huge pile at the end of the day. I also own and operate and run a new educational platform called Regenerative Living. And as I was taking a look over the last couple of years, and not just the last couple of years, but at least the last decade, people are getting a lot more polarized and a lot more recalcitrant. They have their opinions and their beliefs, and you're not in my camp, then you're in that camp. And I wanted to host a space for practitioners to share skills that allow us to live on the planet as if we intend to stay. And that's the end of the ideology. And when I reached out to Neil and Jeff about a year ago, we talked about this and they both seemed very keen. So over the last year, we've been developing this course and really building to a crescendo that will come to fruition in January of 2022. And what I love today is we get to share with you so much of their experience and their conversation. So without further ado, Neil and Jeff, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, thanks, Javin. Thanks, Raleigh. Hey, everybody. Yeah, my name is Jeff Adams. I am a permaculture-based landscape contractor and watershed restoration practitioner based in Moab, Utah. I've been self-employed running Terra Sophia LLC since 2006. So I've really had the great pleasure of working on a whole range of projects over the last 15, 16 years, as well as getting to interact, learn with, collaborate with, and innovate with a lot of other great practitioners in this field, including Neil and Javin and others. And really excited about this opportunity to share some of our work with y'all.
Hi, everyone. I'm Neil Bertrando. I'm based out of Reno, Nevada. I run a design consulting and education firm called RT Permaculture. I also run a small scale nursery growing out locally practical permaculture plants, pollinator plants, herbs, fruit trees, things that would fit into either a homestead or a farm landscape to create multifunctional landscapes. And I've run my business since about 2009, so just over 10 years, and have been doing watershed restoration work since 2013. I've had the pleasure of working with Jeff, Javin, some of the other great mentors in the field, such as Bill Zedike and Craig Sponholtz. And I'm really excited to be here with y'all. So these are some of the publications that Jeff and I have created that are specific to low tech erosion control and provide you with opportunities to implement shovel-ready solutions. And all of these are freely available. You can get the erosion control treatment training packet and brush mineral features guide on my website. And you can get the brush mineral features and the keyline design principles guides on Jeff's website. My website is rtpermaculture.com and Jeff's is terrasophia.com.
So you might be wondering, why now? Why are we having this conversation now? What's important about this conversation? And one of the things that we've learned about action and taking action within the face of cataclysmic ecological destruction is there can be things that push us and there can be things that pull us towards right action and right livelihood. Now, as we take a look at the global state and we get a pulse on what's going on, we're seeing roughly 3.1 billion people affected by water scarcity every single year. 12 million hectares of arable land globally is lost to desertification every single year. Almost 1 billion acres is lost to wildfire. And that's that number, because I've worked in wildfire, developed a documentary called Facing Fire, Building Resiliency to Wildfire, and do a lot of wildfire designs and resistance designs, not only locally, but down in the States. That 1 billion acres is not a natural number. That has to do with exclusion and suppression. And once we have this conversation of total exclusion, total expression of wildfire, we build up fuel load, we build up a lot of issues that come with that. So that 1 billion acres is definitely over and above what we would normally see. Added to this, we're losing an incredible number of species every single year, between 200 and 2,000 species. And this mostly has to do with the way that we are disrupting ecology and disrupting wetlands. When we put most of this water into the air, we take it out of the landscape and into the air, we continually increase the thermodynamics of our atmosphere and increases the amount of rain that comes down, to the point to where the landscapes that we see are not always able to manage all that water that comes out. And as that water comes out, it starts to pick up material, starts to pick up sand, silt, and clay and soil beds and move it downland, to the point to where we're losing on average 24 billion tons of soil. Finally, and definitely not last in this run up, we've got the third hottest year on record in 2020. So all things said, there's lots of reason to be moving towards this type of work. But what I find more so, and what I found in Neil and Jeff's work in both the case studies they're going to run today, and I have a number of case studies on the Low Tech Erosion Control landing page in my YouTube site that we've been running. I've been so overjoyed at what these landscapes look like. And this is something you'll see time and time again. They end up blending into a landscape. They're very light. They're a very light touch on the land. They're not big implementations, but they have a huge effect. Jeff and Neil are going to talk about some examples where just with a few days and a few individuals and a small budget, they were able to create something that had a regenerative ruin quality. Now, I don't own that term. That's a Brad Lancaster term, but at some point, Homo sapiens will be done. Our time on this planet will be over. And what are we going to leave behind? Are we going to leave behind ruins that have a degenerative effect for acres or years to come? Or are we going to leave something that's regenerative? And what I love about this type of work, low tech erosion control, is it is a regenerative ruin. When you place it well and you work with it well and you walk away, it accrues silt, it accrues vegetation recruitment. It helps to either concentrate or spread water depending on its usage. But what is most surprising about this is these are natural materials. Low tech erosion controls are using natural materials, sticks, stones, sometimes a little bit of built or man-made materials, but generally working with what's in the landscape and just developing a comprehension and an understanding to read the landscape well. What I love also is that it's a broad toolbox of scalable shovel-ready techniques. So scalable means it can be as large or as small as necessary, and shovel-ready is, if you know how to use a shovel, chances are you can put one of these things in. And that's what is so inspiring about this work with Jeff and Neil, is that it's readily accessible. The democracy of this is quite wide because anyone can learn these techniques. The influences of this work are wide and varied. And while we have individuals like Bill Zedike and Craig Sponholtz and the Quivera Coalition and a number of others, I love that Jeff put in this top left-hand image, which is really about the indigenous individuals that have come before and have managed these landscapes for millennia, using small, simple techniques that have wide-ranging effects. And as my work in wildfire prevention really showed, there was a specific and a coordinated and, dare I say, malicious attack on indigenous knowledge, calling it savage, calling it without value, that devalued that knowledge, devalued that ancestral memory that we're just coming back to today. And I think this is what Neil and Jeff have said many times. This is not necessarily new. This is a reincorporation of what has been traditionally known for years. So who is low tech erosion control for? Well, when we take a look at it, it's for anybody who's a land manager or a land steward. And my personal belief is that if you're born a human, you are automatically a land manager. You're automatically a land steward. We have the capacity, the process, the scope and scale to look at our planet and understand its past, present, and future. That makes us the ideal, if not the land steward. So if you are a land steward, if you're actively working with land, if you're a homeowner, homesteader, farmer, rancher, designer, landscape designer, working with your municipality, these are tools, in my belief, and I think Jeff and Neil's as well, that you have to have in your toolbox. There's no reason not to have these in your toolbox. If you're dealing with erosion, if that erosion is affecting infrastructure, these are tools that can help. If you're worried about creating or working with wildland pollinators or wildlife pollinators, this is important. We need to create more habitat. If you're living in an arid environment that's prone to drought, that has flash floods, or if you're seeing flash floods and drought become common in your area, these are tools that can help. If you're currently under water restrictions, like many individuals are, this is a way to use the finite amount of precious material that comes from the sky and to put it into productive use in a way that doesn't take away more soil from your landscape and thus take away capacity to build habitat. And last but not least, and Raleigh did a great job of talking about this, and this is very true and very close to my heart right now in British Columbia. 2 weeks ago, we had major rains that were very unseasonal. And because of the logging that's happened in British Columbia and because of the wildfires, the vegetative sponge in the headlands of the mountains that would have normally held some of that water wasn't there. And the city of Vancouver, which is the second largest metropolitan area in Canada, was completely cut off by the rest of Canada. because every single road, every single major highway was either washed out, totally gone, or completely inundated with mud. I had a family member who was stuck there for a week. These are not issues that are in our distant past. These are issues that are clear and present and are going to continue to be into our future. So for me, this tool of low-tech erosion control and the specific techniques and tools and strategies that Neil and Jeff are going to touch upon today, and the case studies they're going to show, are tools that we have to learn. We're almost indebted to learn to leave this planet better than we found it. So with that, I'll pass it over to Jeff to talk a little bit more about a few case studies. Jeff?
Great, thanks, Javin. Yeah, and so excited to share these. So this first slide is really just kind of showing you a snapshot of a couple of the tools in this toolbox, and a couple overarching principles and considerations for any site is really, what are you trying to fix? So what's going on in your landscape? Is it just that something's eroding? Is there a potential to spread water and maybe reconnect an alluvial fan or a portion of a floodplain to get more water to spread out, soak in? Are you trying to grow crops? Are you trying to reestablish native vegetation? And so I'm always asking myself, what am I trying to accomplish? And then one of the next questions is, what are we working with? How big is the problem? How widespread? What materials are nearby? So there's always a discussion of, do we have the right materials just on the site already, or do we need to import something from nearby? And in our case here in Moab, there's often times where we're importing cobble rocks because they're readily available. Even if they're not on the specific project site, they're within a few mile radius, so it's a cost-effective resource for us. And so just to kind of highlight a couple of these techniques, the upper left is a log and fabric step fall structure treating a head cut in a slope wetland ecosystem, combined with a log mat for grade control, and that's what's going to be in the lower portion here. So we've got the log mat, and that essentially backs up water, creates a little splash pool. So it's all about dissipating the energy as the water flows come down the valley. And so instead of eroding over a head cut, which is a nick point or disturbance in the land, you can kind of think of it as a waterfall. But what happens is that power of that falling water over the head cut causes it to unzip the watershed and leaves an incised channel or gully that then causes water to move even faster out of the site. And so we're trying to slow that water down, spread it out, soak it in this case using logs and rocks. Upper right hand corner, these structures are called media lunas. They were first conceptualized by Van Clothier out of Silver City, and that essentially takes a concentrated flow of water. They're level in the landscape, and then that helps to spread that water back to sheet flow while also allowing some amount of water and sediment and organic debris to accumulate on the uphill side. These rock structures are typically seated underneath the rocks so that we're encouraging that vegetation to grow up through the rocks using the benefits of the microclimate created by that. Kind of bottom right corner, this is a mimic of a step pool system. So if you are familiar, you've been in the mountains or steep countries, often you'll see nature do this pattern where there's a steep spot, a splash pool, a steep spot, a splash pool, so that's the energy dissipation as you move over a certain steeper country. And so this particular project was, we used invasive species tree limbs of a Russian olive removal project. We layered those with some mineral earth, and we used some of the rock cobble for additional armoring and stability. And then bottom left, this is similar to the top photo there. It's this log mat that's across the channel. So it causes this water to pool up, and instead of just, you can kind of see the remnants of the channel, so the water would move really fast down there. And now we've got these several structures in there to cause some pooling, cause some spreading, let that sediment drop out, and really encourage vegetation. Because an end goal with a lot of these structures is to get the physical stability, to change the site conditions, the microclimate conditions, so that we can grow plants. And then the plants take over doing a lot of that work of stabilizing the soil with their roots, combing surface runoff through their above ground portions, helping to encourage more deposition and accrue benefits onto the site. And so to get into the first case study, this is a project I've been working on in multiple phases in Mill Creek Canyon, right outside of Moab. And we've got a couple different things going on here. This is an incredibly popular hiking destination. And so we've got kind of social trails all through this steep, sandy landscape of people trying to find their way down to the water. And what that's ended up causing is that the human and dog traffic, in conjunction with wind and water erosion, has left these plants kind of high and dry. So it's kind of created these pedestals, and it's a really common pattern that you can start to see in the landscape of exposed roots, or these like high cut banks that, you know, the soil wasn't always that, you know, the soil was there when those plants started growing, and it's since eroded out. And we'll often see that over time, as this process continues, whole plants just slough off. They fall into channels. They otherwise become destabilized because they don't have the same soil volume, and they're getting essentially their roots undercut. So they're on these like high and dry islands when all of the resources they need are rushing past them, not being held in the landscape. And so this particular area was also a safety concern, because the main trail kind of comes right along this upper edge, and there's these really steep drop-offs that it was kind of, this was actually a head cut moving up into the path, and there was some health and safety concerns. And so for this particular project, we did a combination of what we've called brush mineral structures. We've sort of now see them as like upland beaver dams, because we're essentially mimicking what beaver do, in that we're overlapping organic matter, in this case the invasive tamarisk. So we kind of stacked functions. We removed a species that was not wanted on one property, and we're able to use that as our primary building material on this other project. So, you know, as you can tell from the pictures, we did import this material. It was maybe less than 5 miles away from the project site, and free material, just the labor to go cut it. Then we you know, we had the roads closed, so we had to haul it up to the project site. And then it's a matter of layering it. And so you probably could tell from that first picture, this was a incredibly stable, steep site. And using this technique of layering, we've got the brush, so you can kind of see these, and they're kind of partly stacked, partly woven. And then we put a mix of wood chips and reject sand or mineral earth, and that material gets packed in between. And so we work it in there real good. When needed on steeper slopes, sometimes we kind of call it like towing it in. And so you're stepping each layer back into the hillside. So you end up with a very stable, but still pretty steep structure. And you can, depending on your specific site conditions, you can turn these into terraces. And there's a whole lot of creativity and adaptability in this style of technique. And so there's one of my crew members adding the mix of wood chips and mineral earth. And what that really does is, if you think of conventional construction or even natural building, like we're mixing, we've got kind of the long fibers, the rebars, the sticks that are really providing that major stability. And then the mix of wood chips and mineral earth helps to pack in, so we get a really solid structure that can absorb a lot of water, can hold a lot of water, but is not prone to erosion, because that matrix that's formed of the mineral earth, the wood chips, and the larger brush just becomes incredibly stable over time, especially once it gets rained on or snowed on. So there's just another shot. You can kind of see that it's taking shape. That first slide, you know, is probably about 3 feet below this now, and so now we're starting to get these little micro terraces coming up this hillside, and that really helps to capture and hold the direct rainfall on this site, and as well as provides a stable surface that people can walk on this, and they're not going to be causing the erosion like they were before. Here's a view from the other side of the creek. You can really just see how massive and steep this is. So again, that first course of the of brush that we showed in that first picture there, that's all way down here, and then we've got just these successive layers, all staggered so that you can walk on it. This site was not planted. We're hoping for some natural vegetation recruitment, and at some future phase we might do some active re-veg, but at this case the main objective was stop this erosion. And this is just an in progress photo here, so you can still see just how nearly vertical this site that we were working on and how eroded out. And this is highly sandy soils with a little bit of rock in there, so it's like each footprint, each impact of a raindrop is impacting it and causing some erosion. And so then here's that before picture again. You can see the degraded condition, and here it is upon completion. And this is before it got rained on. This was literally like minutes after we finished it, but no more potential for erosion because we shaped the site with all those little terraces that I was telling you about. They're a little bit hard to pick up on here in this angle, but they're in there. And you know, happy to show anybody if you ever want to come to Moab and see some of this in person. Look me up, but it's a great technique that is just extremely adaptable. We've done it with tumbleweeds, with Russian olives. We have a running joke on our job sites that we almost always run out of invasive plants and weeds to use in these structures, because as you saw from those truck loaded full, like it can take a lot of material to treat a whole hillside like this. And so again, depending on your goals and objectives, that's going to inform sort of how big you go and how much you want to shape up these this specific brush mineral or upland beaver dam technique. And then just showing the adaptability. This was just a little bit down the path from the rest of those shots. And another thing I really love about this is you can fit it to the landscape. You can just wiggle it and work around existing vegetation and do it in such a way that now we're supporting the existing vegetation while setting up the conditions for improved vegetation response and recruitment over time. And so this picture was just from this spring. It was a pretty fresh project, so it's going to be really fun to see how it evolves and continues to take shape over time. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Neil.
Great work, Jeff. I love how simplistic it is. I love how it melts into the background. And I imagine in the next couple of years, as you come back, that recruitment will come in and it'll just start to see these little coral reefs of vegetation. Hey?
Awesome.
Go for it, you.
Thanks, Jeff and Javin. So this technique I'm going to share with you is called fish scale straw mulch. It's a vertical mulch technique. I first heard about it through the work of David Bainbridge and his arid and dryland desert restoration literature and practices. And one thing I really like about it is it's very simple and easy to do with people that can be trained on site in real time. And it uses straw or something that's a fairly readily available material in many areas. So this site where we're applying it is in Riverside, California. So it's a hot and dry location. And it's an open space inside of a homeowner association where for fire prevention purposes, they had been removing vegetation in the summer for many years actually using a disc, a tractor with a disc, so really disturbing the vegetation and driving up and down the hill slopes with the disc. And this had led to a lot of rill erosion, as well as just kind of stark vegetation deprived landscapes. And so the first thing that we actually proposed was to take away the stressor of the disking and the very low level mowing, and that if they wanted to do fire prevention using mowing, to mow higher, to leave 4 to 6 inches of stubble on the landscape when mowing. And then the next thing that we did was we were looking at how can we treat these rills in the landscape immediately. We had some AmeriCorps volunteers there, and so what we did was we trained them up on several different techniques that they could apply, as well as trained up some volunteers from the Homeowners Association so that the people living in the area could continue to steward the landscape over time. One of the things that is really amazing with the fish scale mulch is it just takes 2 people and it goes really quick. It's fairly small. So the fish scale is basically the shape of the shovel. One person puts the shovel in the ground and pulls back the soil, and the next person has a bundle of straw ready, or you can also use any sort of available vegetation material, small branches or things like that would work too if you have shrubs or other things in the area that are dead or desiccated, as is often the case in dry environments. And you just shove it in, and then you pack it down with your foot. And the vertical mulch does many things. One, it slows the wind moving across the landscape. And so it starts to settle out organic matter and seeds and other debris. Also, by packing it in there, it's held in the landscape so that it doesn't blow away, which is often a challenge in desert areas when you start to apply mulch to the landscape. So it's held there, and it's also held in place when water flows over it, and it creates small microclimates with some shade as well. So it does a whole lot of things to support the recruitment of vegetation. So here's just 13 days after putting it in, we had a small rain event, and you can see already there's germination occurring right up hill from the fish scale straw mulch, and deposition as well. So we're getting both micro alluvial fans of sediment deposition backing up into the rills, as well as the actual vegetation is starting to respond, which is a great thing to see. And then here's 76 days after install, and this is coming into the wet season, so we've had some significant rain events, and the whole landscape is starting to respond to that. And you can see that the fish scale straw mulch, which was done with wheat straw, has both germinated the wheatgrass from the seeds that were in the straw, as well as really backed up a good alluvial bit of sediment, which is holding and storing water and supporting the growth of both the grass and germinating new plants. And these are literally growing the vertical mulch for the next season and the next rainy season. So it's starting to become a regenerative process already, with just a simple, easy installation with a few people and some straw bales over the course of a couple hours. So you can cover a fair amount of landscape with this if you have the materials and the manpower. You don't need any machinery or anything like that. So it's great for that real kind of low-tech, hands-on approach. And here's just another example of the sediment deposition that's occurring. So these are really creating a lot of micro catchments and just kind of jump-starting the system. And you can see here that we put these across along a contour on the slope and just kind of staggered them, mixing in with the existing rills so that they would one of the goals here is to decrease the channelized flow that's moving down the slope in the rills and creating more erosion as the water is channelized and becomes more powerful, and to restore sheet flow so that the water is then spread out and evenly moving across the landscape. And these do that very effectively in small rills. So this is a good treatment when you have a landscape that's eroding a little bit in a lot of places, because you can treat a lot of little spots quickly with it. And then that restoration of sheet flow allows the water to slow down and sink in, and really decreases both the power of the water and the erosive capacity, as well as increases the ability for it to be available for vegetation. So here's a slightly different application of the same technique at the same location. So in this case, this path is a low use dirt road. Sometimes it's driven on by golf carts or trucks or things like that to do some maintenance. Otherwise, it's used by walkers and bikers and people riding horseback. And originally the water took the pathway along the dark blue line in the center there, and it maintained sheet flow just flowing down the landscape. And this road is slightly outsloped, so it allowed the water to continue in that direction until it got just a little bit too kind of in size, and it captured the water and turned the water into a creek along the right side of the road there, the downhill side. And so that had just started happening, in the recent rains, really creating this erosion rill down the side of the road and keeping the water on the road. And so what we wanted to do was remove the road's function as a creek and restore the hydrology to the original flow down the landscape as sheet flow across the slope. And so we just put in several little fish scale straw mulch structures. Let's see if it helps. For some reason I can't find my, there it is. Along the pathway that the water was taking the rill. And so that allowed us to redistribute the water, and we nicked out the edge of the rill so that the water would return back to the flow down the hill along the landscape. And so instead of putting the structures along contour across the hill, we did many to spread out the water and restore sheet flow all the way down the hill until we got to this location where the road changed slope and the water flowed off naturally from the road. And so we treated this whole section where the rill was forming and allowed the water just to flow back in the landscape. And this both maintains the integrity of the road as well as rehydrates the landscape just with a little bit of straw. And this took about 30 minutes with 2 people. So, it can be pretty effective and rapid. And the trick is to catch the erosion early on before it starts to really get down and in size in the landscape when you're using this sort of technique. And with that, I'll hand it back to Jeff.
Wonderful work, Neil. Just love that fish scale swale and our fish scale vertical mulch. Fantastic. For everybody who's asking questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A and just reference the case study. So the first one was the upland beaver dams. The second one was fish scale vertical mulch. And now we're getting into the rainwater garden. So if you want it specific, just put that into the Q&A. Go ahead, Jeff.
All right, got me unmuted there. So this was a project quite different than the last one to just kind of help highlight the whole range of applications. So this is a open space kind of public community center in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They're very interested in being water wise, managing their water effectively as much as they could. And so their first step before I was involved with the project, they put in a roof water catchment system. Like any good catchment system, they do have an overflow, but in this case, it crosses the whole parking area and just goes into a field. So not really being put to the highest use of all of the potential roof water. And then at the same time, they have this big driveway and parking area that has all these little runoff rills forming as this water moves across. You can kind of see where it starts going down the slope. It's actually leaving their property and going and causing erosion down this hill slope and putting sediment onto a neighbor's field. And so we really were like, well, what else can we do in this space to meet the objectives of showcasing and using all of the water resources on the site to the highest potential? How can we stop this erosion? How can we actually get some multifunctional plantings established on this this edge of the property and really go from something that's fairly degraded and losing value and resources to something that's regenerative, accruing benefits, and is a really good showcase of these techniques for this particular spot, does get decent traffic. And so we designed a series of earthworks and also rerouted the overflow from the rain tank now goes into the first earthwork. The this upper edge of kind of the transition from the driveway to the earthworks, with the exception of these a couple rocks, it's all flush and feathered in, so that now that sheet flow that runs off, instead of going right past the site, now it comes in and becomes an input into this this system. We always need to think of overflows, and we want to hold as much water as we safely can at each point in the system. And so there's a basin here. These rocks help to set the elevation and allow water to pool up in each of these locations before its final destination. If all of that fills up, then there's a simple rolling dip kind of water bar across the driveway that then overflows the final volume of water into the field where the tank's water was originally going. And so we've kind of worked with and keep connecting the hydrology there, but trying to maximize the residence time on the landscape so that we can get as many benefits out of this as possible. And where those benefits really start coming in is then we've planted the edges of the basins with pollinator attracting native multifunctional shrubs, wildflowers, so that these plants over time, they will start to send their roots down into these basins that are filled with organic matter. They're catching any sediments coming off the driveway. They're getting that extra dose of water every time it rains. So we're really creating this lush, rich, moist soil for these plants to get into, while also setting the plants at a height where they're not going to get fully inundated. Especially, some plants don't mind being, having standing water up against them. Other plants really don't like that. And so planting on the edges gets your plants in close proximity to where the water is, but also keeps their root collar high and dry. And then if you kind of hone in on these rock aprons, you'll see this U shape. And what that does is that makes sure that we're pooling up water and inundating it in the basin, but we're not gonna have a potential blowout or failure by end cutting. And so what you see in a lot of times, if your rocks or your structure doesn't go up high enough to tie into the bank, that water may pool up and end up coming around and causing erosion and bypassing your structure. So really paying attention to the shape of things, having those edges come several inches higher than the flow point, so that we can safely pool up and overflow that water from one basin to the next, while minimizing the potential for end cutting or creating some unintended consequence with our projects. And so this is one I've been meaning to get back there. This was done 6 years ago, and I just haven't had a chance to get back down there to see how all the vegetation's doing. So hopefully sometime soon I'll be able to get a more recent picture and update that. And so with that, I will turn it back to you, Neil.
Thanks, Jeff. So this next example that we're showing is kind of a connection of several different treatments into a treatment train. And this was for a homeowner who we had already installed some water harvesting earthworks on the landscape. And now they were experiencing some erosion due to the stressor created by creating a house and a pad on the driveway. And so we were looking at ways to utilize that water, get it off of the driveway so it wasn't eroding and destroying their infrastructure, and at the same time get it soaking into the landscape. And so you can see here, there's under the orange section of the drawing, there's already kind of a cut going into the landscape. And this shows the sequence of a rockline channel connected with a rolling dip, and then diverting the water out into the vegetated portion of the landscape so that it can be used to grow more vegetation. And we had just had a recent rainfall before we even got started on the project. And it had already cut a new erosion rill down the area that the owner had prepped. And one thing that was interesting about this project was that the owner really wanted to have kind of a showpiece that lined the driveway and looked nice. And because my first suggestion was that they literally just trim off the edge of the road so that the water could maintain sheet flow and just flow back in the landscape as sheet flow. And that would have definitely been the cheapest, easiest way to do it. But they wanted to have kind of a showpiece of rockworks, and they were willing to spend the money to buy the rocks and put it in. And so we have all the material staged here right by where we're getting ready to put in a channel drain. And there's the drain put in, and you can see they put the rocks on the far side to create kind of a border and an edge. And that's something that if you're really trying to manage the water for flow, that's going to hold the water in the channel and not allow it to flow over into the landscape. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing, but if you allow it to flow and spread a sheet flow back in the landscape, it's going to be much more passive than it is in a channel drain like we constructed. And so here's after that same channel drain, after about a year where it started already revegetate and growing with just native seeds and grasses and flowers. And you can see where the water would travel. Oops. The water could travel down the drain. Anyways. And into a little bowl that diverts the water, and also the flow off of the driveway using this rolling dip to flow into the landscape. And so here was the initial rolling dip that we created. The homeowner, I had proposed 2 rolling dips, and they decided that they got I wanted to apply just asphalt shavings from a nearby project where they could get them for free and put them on the driveway to really stabilize the drive. So they just put in this initial rolling dip here that allows the water to be diverted off the driveway and flow into this Zuni bowl where water can pool, and then also be diverted, because the splash pool allows you to change the direction and energy of the water. And then if it comes down with any extra force, it can also flow over this way and be maintained in the channel drain along the side of the road and pour out in the next section here. And here's an example of what we designed to divert the water out of the landscape and spread it out on a already kind of alluvial fan portion of the landscape using a media luna. And so here's the construction of that. And what you can see, it's an important thing to consider is that this location here, all the rocks are put in flush and feathered into the landscape so that water can easily just flow down into here and isn't getting caught and diverted along this section, because it'll channelize the water and erode away and that kind of decrease and eliminate the value of the structure. So it's able to get into the armored area, and it's going to flow down here to this media luna. So here's it completed, and we had some extra gravel, so we just piled it on the media luna, kind of like mortar, to fill in the spots and use up the extra gravel. So again, here you can see the water can flow in from this direction easily, smoothly into the Zuni bowl. The pools here, you can actually see that there's been some pooling and some sediment deposited, and then down here into the media luna work, and then spread out and return to sheet flow in the landscape. And you can see that the vegetative response on this media luna was immediate, and it's already filled with native grass, bunch grass and sod forming grass. And here's a photo of it at the end of the year after they had installed the asphalt shavings. And again, you can see that one thing that's really important in all these structures is that you keep this entry really smooth and flush with the surface so that the water can actually flow and doesn't get backed up or pushed around the structure like what Jeff showed in his as well. And something that I liked about this was that we were able to really maintain the vegetation in many locations along the whole set of the structure and provide it with some stability, and rocks in the vegetation responded well and continued to grow. So this is just showing you how that that smooth transition here, where you're really flush with the landscape to make sure the water can just flow over it easily. And here's a downhill shot of the media luna already filled in with grass and restabilized and revegetated. And so then this is the lower section of that channel, and you can see that it was eroding pretty badly already here, and already flowing down into the broader landscape, really creating an erosion gully. And what we wanted to do was just stabilize that so that it could flow into the water harvesting earthworks without bringing a bunch of sediment with it, and also without eroding into the road and destroying the infrastructure. So again, we staged rocks along the side of it, and the homeowner got a little bit more ambitious in preparing the area than I was hoping, and removed a couple of the shrubs that I think we could have saved. But and then here's a shot from above. You can see where the water flows, and is able to turn down there using the Zini bowl into the landscape. And here's a shot at the end of the year, showing where the water was able to flow along the uphill side of this level sill and flow into the swale and soak in and support the emerging tree growth and multi-story food forest plantings that have been designed for the site. So I think that's the end of that one. And with that, I'll hand it back to Javin.
Thanks so much, Neil. I love seeing your work every single time, both of you. It's so inspiring about the degree to which the effect we can have for small amounts of material, small amount of effort, and it has such a resounding effect. So yeah, thank you both for doing what you're doing. I collaborate with so many individuals, but it's really something to be inspired every single time I see your guys' work. So thank you very much. And thank you so much for everybody who's been commenting and chatting. There's been a lot of good conversation going on, and I so appreciate that. So what we'll do is we'll just wrap up with a bit of a conversation about the course that's coming up, and then we'll get to the 5 questions that are in the Q&A. If anybody else has a question, feel free to put it into the Q&A. Just put @Jeff, @Neil, and then just reference whatever project it was that they were talking about or topic, because sometimes that can take a bit of conversation just to make sure that everyone is aware of what the question is about. So Low Tech Erosion Control is a course aimed at understanding how to assess, how to build a comprehensive plan for installation, and how to approach this type of work. It's over 7 sessions. We start in January 19th. And Neil and Jeff have put together an incredible curriculum that they have labored over for a year. And I love it. When I reached out originally, Jeff was like, yeah, let's take about a year to develop this. So we've taken the slow train to really go slow and build something very comprehensive that we're really proud of. And it's really aimed at being able to assess, design, and implement these structures, to work with habitat and to work with erosion, and to really have good effect. We start on January 19th, we go to March 2nd, and we go through step by step. What is low tech erosion control? How do we do assessments? What are some case studies? We'll go back into some of these case studies, but in deeper depth, and then others. Something that I think both these gentlemen excel at is project design and planning. How do you actually manage that project from beginning to end? I've learned an incredible amount from Neil about that. And then implementation. What do you do in that process, and what are next steps? Now, something interesting is that everything's a trial, right? Everything in business is you make an airplane, you fly the paper airplane, you see how it goes. And so far, the response to this course has been really good. And we'll see if the response as we get to the final beginning is the same, because we're thinking about running a practicum or a walk along, where folks will bring actual projects, and Neil and Jeff will work with those projects over a season. If this course does well, we'll think about offering that. So that's something to put in the back of your mind. This course will run on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and then 9 Eastern. It's 60 minutes of presentation, 30 minutes of Q&A. And already we have an incredible like-minded group of folks who are designers from all over the world. one of the things I love most about working with designers like Neil and Jeff and implementers and practitioners is that we all learn from mistakes. They just don't have to be our own. So learning from somebody who's worked in this field, whatever the field is, for a decade, moving on into their second, is really skipping the grade. It's skipping the class. It's moving ahead. It's being able to work with elements and understandings that have already paid the price of the mistake. So it's one of those things that I've loved most about working with both of these gents. Now, for everybody who's a Sustainable Design Masterclass follower and audience member, we've got a special offer for everybody. Right now, the course is $249 as an early bird. It'll go up to $349 closer to the course date. But if you're interested in this course, this feels like a good fit for you, not a hard pitch at all. But if it's of interest, then you have the opportunity by midnight on Sunday to get $50 off of the early bird course with the code SDMCLTEC 2022. If you're interested in that, take a look at regenerativeliving.online. I'll put the link back in the chat. It'll be great to have you. And we have a number of other courses coming up, including designing and implementing multifunctional hedgerows with Jude Hobbs. Wonderful course. If you're interested about family food and family security, it's a whole season course we run. Zach Weiss and I will be doing a 2-session on hugelkulturs. Gord Baird, who literally wrote the book about bringing gray water and composting toilets into the building code of British Columbia, the first province or state to do that in North America, will be running a gray water, composting toilets, and rainwater harvesting course in the winter of 2022. We have regenerative cooking with Chef Seth Peterson that's coming up, which I'm really excited about. How do you start off the year right? It's by knowing how to feed your family well and yourself. Cold Climate Forest Gardens with Luke Rosewood, and we'll be offering again working with Living Soils with Joe Tobias, an amazing living soil consultant. So really excited to have her in. So again, just a big thanks to Sustainable Design Masterclass for hosting us. A big thanks to Neil and Jeff. And with that, I'll pull up the questions and we'll start going ahead, unless anybody else on the panelist team has anything else to add before we begin.
I got a shout out. There are some fantastic people on this webinar right now, practitioners, water heroes. We've got 2 warrior women water heroes. We have Natalie Topa and Minnie Yang, just doing incredible work across Africa and the Mediterranean and India. It's so cool seeing them, and practitioners like Jeremiah Martin joining us here, who are also working in the Via Vidal restoring watersheds. It's so cool seeing people doing this work and really badass people just joining us for this session. It really speaks to the quality of the people and the purpose of this work, the shared purpose. It's pretty beautiful. So thanks for joining us, everybody, regardless of what stage you are in. So yeah, now is time for the Q&A. So if you've been saving up questions, pop them in here now. And one more thing, Javin, if you can post that link
Will do.
In that chat box, that'd be nice. And yeah, everyone will get a replay after that, this session. And Javin, you mentioned that some of these materials, there's like a more free things that Neil and Jeff have wrote up about their approach. You said that that's on their website. Yeah,
exactly. That's on their website. You can take a look at it there. And basically what we'll do for anybody else, we'll be offering this replay as a free session as the first module of the course. And I think what we'll do, Neil and Jeff, if it's okay with you, we'll put those in as resources as well for that first module. Just have one place where everyone can go. So I'll put in this link right now. And I just saw that Minnie Jane's on this call. Minnie, wow. So good to have you on the call. Great, let's grab into a question here. First question is from Michael Chang. Jeff, what was your decision process like for citing location of the new trail to make it less likely that the social trails didn't reemerge? I know that sometimes those spontaneous trails just go off straight up, down, side, cliff, worst path for erosion. Thanks for sharing your work. Invasive equal path to super cool. So I'll bring up the slide and Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, good question. So with that, there was one path going down the hill that was very clearly like the main path to a real nice overlook. That would be the path in the foreground that's kind of running almost parallel to the bottom of the slide. So we kept that as a path, but we actually layered it with about a foot of material, similar sticks with the mineral earth and the wood chips. So the walking surface itself became more stable. And to discourage people from just going off trail, we actually left a lot of sticks just jagging out of it. So if you want to try climbing up or down that, have fun, but it is not an inviting looking thing, and you'll probably like tear your clothes and get stuck on it somewhere. So that was kind of our decision, was just make this purposefully look like something that you just wouldn't want to try to walk over, but maintain a path so that people can still get to the good views, do a little loop, and have the ability to explore the area a bit. So that was kind of the balance. But you're absolutely right. In some other projects, we fix one area and people just start creating a new trail 10 feet over, and it's an ongoing problem in certain instances.
Great answer. And say same project question from DJ Wells. What is the mineral earth used for the upland beaver dam?
Yeah, great question. So the mineral earth for us, it's a byproduct from a local quarry. So as they sift out all of the cobblestones and all the aggregate, they get this, we call it reject sand, but it's actually a great mix of small gravels. It's got a certain amount of clay and silt in it. So it doubles as a really good natural building material for cob and stuff. And its role in this is essentially the combination of organic matter and mineral soil is really what makes for a good, healthy living sponge. It also, in this case, the clays and silts in that mineral soil help to hold on to moisture, and that in conjunction with organic matter becomes a really prime spot for fungal mycelium to grow, because fungus loves both minerals and woody debris. It also makes the structures quicker to be able to revegetate, because if you only have organic matter in these structures, it's a longer breakdown period to get a growing medium that can support your plants. Whereas if we're putting 50% mineral earth in there, we're right away getting something that's close to being plantable if you're at a spot where you want to then plant directly into these treatments. And then I think the other benefit of the mineral earth is that it helps to embed all that organic matter, so that we're not creating a fire hazard by just having a pile of sticks and organic matter. But once you get everything caked in there and bedded down, it becomes something that, other than the little bits of sticks on the edges, is not going to be readily flammable, because it's got that mineral earth holding it all together. So that's kind of a few of the reasons that that we integrate the mineral earth into these.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. We had a couple of questions about the course. I'll just hit those now. One of them was, if you miss a presentation, will you have access to it? Absolutely. All the presentations will be recorded. You'll have access to them 48 hours afterwards, and there's lifetime access to the course. So this isn't, you have access for a year and then it's gone. You do have lifetime access to the course. So hopefully that answers the question for Michael Lynn. And thanks so much. A bunch of people are saying they're taking the course. That's awesome. From Benjamin, close to the buildings, interesting case and great work. Are those basins sized in terms of permeability, porosity to absorb the strongest thunderstorms locally? So I'll just skip to that. And I think that's for you there, Jeff.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that particular site, as in many sites, there's the goal is always to hold enough, have enough retention capacity, holding capacity for your design storm event. The reality in the field is that there's often constraining factors that make it so you might not be able to do something as big as you would want. In this case, we kept the infiltration 12 feet from the building. Then we had the fence line that we needed to have space to create the berm with the soil that we dug. And then we had the road. So by the time we kind of had all these different site constraining factors, we weren't able to get the basins as big as we ideally would have for the biggest of the storms, but we maximized the use of the space based on the site dimensions. Because the other thing that we didn't want to do is we didn't want to go too much deeper, because we didn't want to oversaturate near the road or building. We also didn't want to have to build rock walls and do a lot of extra work to stabilize those slopes. So we essentially had, say, this much available width, and then you get a nice bowl shape with your 3-to-1 sides. And that essentially, in conjunction with the slope coming from the, in this case, the building towards us in the picture, those factors combine to essentially inform what we can reasonably fit on this particular site without going to more extreme measures of building out. We've all probably seen in urban areas, a detention system that's got 2-foot concrete walls all around it. And, so we could have gotten more capacity here, but our materials use and the cost of the project would have gone up exponentially. So we just fit as much as we could in this and then overflowed it into the adjacent field. So those bigger storm events are still soaking into the ground, just not in this particular train of rain gardens or basins.
Thanks so much there, Jeff. This next question is directed at both Neil and Jeff. So maybe Neil, you can take it first. From Steve. My assumption is that the areas you are working is fairly dependent on well water for households and agriculture. Is this the case? If so, how long generally will the water reserves last? Is there public and government interest in looking at and taking action to recharge groundwater?
Okay, so yeah, I'll take this. Well, it's very dependent on the specific location. Jeff and I have worked in kind of a wide range of locations, but I'll answer it specific to the Reno area, since I'm most familiar with that area. Most agriculture here is not well water based. It's flood irrigated through a historic system of ditches that draw off of the river. But if you're a homeowner or a homesteader, there are private wells as well that you could use to irrigate small farms. And then the municipal water authority, which manages a series of about 13 dams uphill from Reno, and distributes that water to the homeowners and residences as well as commercial operations. They integrate both the river water, the surface water from the river, as well as a network of wells, and they use the excess river water, when there is excess water in the system, to recharge the groundwater through a series of groundwater recharge wells as well. So there's a lot of detailed hydrology and management that goes into managing water in this area. And so, yes, they are interested in recharging groundwater and doing the best they can to do that.
Jeff, did you want to chime in as well?
I thought that was a good explanation. I mean, a lot of site and context specific implications there, both in terms of what available water resources one might have access to, as well as the specific goals of a project. I know here in Moab and Utah, there's definitely some amount of funding going into erosion control, creek restoration, and I see it only getting more important going into the future as we really get clear on the impacts of climate change, as we really start to see the implications of our sort of thirsty and often mindless consumption of these resources. It's only a matter of time before we really get a scale going to recharge aquifers, to use rainwater and stormwater runoff as really a primary water resource to meet any needs we can with it, and then supplement with a well or a municipal supply. Whereas right now it's kind of the opposite. We rely on our wells or municipal supply, and then maybe we have a little bit of rainwater catchment to support a few plants. And so I see that shift is happening and will continue to happen.
And just to throw in kind of a bit broader picture, bigger context example as well. Jeff and I met working up in Comanche Creek in northern New Mexico, doing slope wetland restoration, applying these sorts of techniques there. And that project is really interesting because it's one of the headwaters of the Rio Grande. And originally the work on the area was funded through endangered fish and endangered species habitat restoration for the Rio Grande cutthroat trout. But over time, the work has also been funded by companies like Coca-Cola and their water initiative, because they draw water off the Rio Grande for some of their bottling plants. And the intention is to restore and maintain the integrity of these wetlands, the headlands of the Rio Grande, which store a lot of water in the wetlands, both on the surface and in the soil subsurface. And it has shown to continue to percolate out longer through the work that's been done up there, and also reduce the temperatures in the water that's flowing out. So that provides both better fish habitat, as well as maintaining and distributing the storm flow over a much longer period of time throughout the year than it was originally when it was rushing out the incised and degraded system. So that's kind of a bigger picture where you have mountain-based wetlands and watersheds that are then flowing down into a major river that's used by a huge suite of users, and that there is some connectivity and interest in restoring and repairing watersheds at that scale as well.
Thank you, gents. Thank you so much for that answer. I'm holding back answering it, and we'll move on to the rest of the questions. From Thomas, what is the role of traditional metal and plastic pipes and culverts that may be integrated into these natural low-tech erosion control systems? I recently used a combination of stone and rocks from the site with an existing PVC culvert to manage cross driveway water movement, and then additional stones and rocks on the downhill side to slow the flow.
Culverts, I think, are have their own set of challenges. They're going to be located in a lot of systems that we're working with, especially road runoff type systems. And some of the common things that are challenges with culverts are that they create erosion both uphill and downhill from the culvert, because they channelize water and kind of turn it into a fire hose. And so commonly what you've mentioned, using rocks as to create stabilizing structures and sediment control structures both uphill and downhill from culverts is done. You can do things like create a drop inlet, which is sort of like a zuni bowl on the uphill side of the culvert, where there's a little scour pool that collects sediment, but also allows it to be transported through the structure in the culvert, and also make sure that the culvert doesn't create a head cut that travels uphill from the culvert, because that commonly happens. And then you can use zuni bowl as a drop outlet, as well as a one rock dam downhill from the culvert, and or media luna, depending on kind of the system you're in, to spread the water back out into the landscape on the downhill side of the culvert. So sometimes people don't want to create rolling dips, which is a simpler way to divert the water off of the road, and they want to have culverts in, or they have existing culverts that need management, and that can definitely be integrated into this sort of work.
Jeff, did you have anything to add?
No, I thought that was a great explanation, Neil.
Okay, awesome. We had a question from Chalet. The other courses mentioned, is there an itinerary timeline cost for these? I need to plan way ahead. Yeah. So I just did a little quick playing with the slides. So Jude Hobbs starts January 9th, 2022. Right now, the list price is $199 until December 10th. Seth is going to start the year by doing a very simple, the top 3 things we need to consider about regenerative cooking in January. And then from there, it's going to be a choose your own adventure for courses. We're going to be polling both of our audiences and also the people on the course to see what's next. He's very keen to do fire cooking. I'm very keen to do fire cooking. We'll probably do fire cooking. Natalie's course starts February 8th. It's $599. It runs from February to September. You couldn't have a better guide. Natalie Pepin, off-grid, Indigenous homesteader and farmer. She's just one of the most badass women I've ever met, and I love teaching with her. Huga Culture, Zach Weiss. Zach and I will be doing 2 sessions March-ish, whenever he's home is when we're going to do that, about $49. Composting toilets, gray water, and rainwater harvesting with Gord Baird. It's all going to be fall 2022. Finally getting around his busy installation schedule. Working with Living Soils with Joe Tobias, just confirmed yesterday, is going to be fall 2022. And then Cold Climate Forest Gardens with Luke is in process right now. So hopefully that answers your question there, Chalet. And then we have Sheila Hollanders. Could taking this course lead to job opportunities? What other education would be required to work in this field? What do you think, guys?
Well, it's kind of a both and. Yes, it could lead to job opportunities, but if you're already working in this sort of field, basically it can expand your toolkit and provide you with more options and opportunities to utilize natural materials or slow and manage erosion and store water in the landscape based on what materials you have available in a site-specific context. But we're not offering, like, you know, a degree or some sort of certificate of competency for just a short online course like this. So it can expand your toolkit, and a lot of these things, like as Jeff likes to say, are shovel ready, so you can go out and start doing them right away. And so, you know, if you're working with friends or on projects where you can implement some stuff and you can document your work and show that the things that you're doing are working, then that sort of thing then lead to job opportunities for you.
Yeah, that's a really solid question. A lot of, especially like younger folks who are looking into this, and you see the amount of grants that are out there from states to deal with, to, you know, increase water supplies and reverse drought. Literally in California, there's billions allocated for, you know, that were voted on. We have two, it's like, it is in the billions allocated for drought solutions. And do you guys have experience tapping into those funds? You know, like those state level, those big drought funds, like, were you able to tap into those successfully?
I haven't tapped into specific drought funds that you're mentioning in California, but I have been involved in several projects in Utah that are funding this type of work, either from a water quality standpoint to kind of keep sediments out of creeks and streams. Some of the funding's coming through for habitat restoration, stuff with sage grouse and as well as aquatic species, and then just overall restoration, just kind of improving these watersheds from a climate resilience standpoint, and this kind of thinking of how do we get ready for what the scientists are modeling and telling us for our region of likely more intense storms, which, if not managed, is going to lead to more erosion. So there's definitely some growing interest from that, and that's really seen as a drought resilience kind of mitigation factor on some of these broader public lands. And then there's stuff within some municipalities. We're kind of got some dialogues going here locally about what this might look like in Utah, in Moab and Grand County, but there's definitely areas that are funding roof water catchment systems, passive water harvesting, gray water systems, landscape conversions, all of these things that help to essentially take some strain off of municipal systems while creating a whole suite of functions and benefits by having these distributed, decentralized, lower tech solutions everywhere. And I think that's where they really get exciting, is when we hit a certain scale. It's like, sure, one project soaking in water from one site might not change the trajectory of a watershed or of a municipal system, but all of a sudden you get hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of these small interventions and solutions within a watershed, and we can have the potential to really see some benefits.
That's great.
I'd like to expand a little bit on my earlier answer too, just to provide some opportunities. I really encourage anyone to get any hands-on experience you can. And one of the organizations that provides a lot of hands-on workshops is the Quivira Coalition. You know, they're in northern New Mexico, but they have several hands-on workshops annually. So if you can get out to any of those, you can learn from some of the, you know, best practitioners in the field, as well as get hands-on experience. And a lot of those are free or volunteer workshops. And then also at Utah State University, there's the Low Tech process-based restoration curriculum that's I think available online. And that's more focused specifically on in-stream activities, which can be a little bit trickier to do because of regulatory hurdles. But they teach things like building beaver dam analogs in stream and other sorts of restoration techniques that are, you know, working with the native ecology and integrating these, basically sticks and stones and low tech materials into restoring watersheds. So those are a couple places where you could jump in and just start getting some information right away.
Yeah, I second that. I was able to go to a Quiet Bear Coalition workshop. I think it was like a 3-day volunteer event. Neil was there, Jeff was there, Bill Zedek was there, Jeremiah was there, Craig was there. And it was like, gosh, it was like a festival of creek restoration. It was such a fun event being there. And like, if you get the chance, volunteer for one of those. Like that for me is a good entry level thing to do. Volunteer, and eventually if you're working in the space, get before and after pictures and case studies. Like that's some of the biggest payoffs that you can show that what you're doing is working. But for folks hey, I need the legitimacy of a degree, where do they get in and kind of like if they have to get a degree or like a master's, something, or a PhD, what's an angle they should take in terms of, there's practical education on the ground, but in terms of like academic education, where do you think people should get in?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think Neil mentioned it, but the Utah State University Watershed Sciences Department, I think that low tech process-based restoration is a certificate program, but then they also have graduate level coursework, and they're a really good department. So I know there's some training available there through Utah State University. And I think for me, I would back up and ask what part of this work does one want to be involved in? Is if you want to be involved in like the research, the monitoring, some of the more like broader scale design stuff, you might need a master's or a PhD. You might need professional engineers can stamp certain plans, especially for like in-stream work that like I can't. But from a implementation standpoint, it might be more valuable to look at getting a contractor's license. I know that was a game changer for me in Utah. And so a lot of this work, you need to be a licensed business and sometimes a licensed contractor to do the actual installation work. And so each state's requirements for that are different. So a little bit of it depends on, which side of the project do you want to be on? And that's going to kind of inform what sort of credentials, licensure, advanced studies, and degrees you might want to pursue.
Nice.
Right, and to become a contractor, generally you have to work for a contractor. So there are erosion control contractors out there. They may not be using the same sort of techniques that we're showing, but you can work for an erosion control contractor, gain a bunch of experience in the field, get your contractor's license, and then apply these techniques as well, in addition to the other things that you've learned as you're working. So, that, like Jeff said, that's a different approach than a degree. It's more of a vocational training.
Cool.
Awesome,
I
guys.
appreciate that answer a lot. It's great.
We've got a final question in the official Q&A, and then I'll go through the chat and just see if we've missed anything. From DJ, have you used any species of trees to reforest desert areas?
I'll give a kind of complicated answer to that one. So in particular in the Intermountain West and the Western United States, the main trees that actually grow in the landscape, if you're in the kind of drier portion of the landscape, are junipers. They're more shrubby-like trees. And often these can take a lot of water out of the landscape and degrade brushlands and grasslands. And then they also, if they really start to grow together, like a pinyon juniper landscape, pinyon pine trees are also common. They can create an opportunity for stand clearing fires. So it's an interesting kind of landscape where trees are not necessarily always the best solution for this specific ecology and landscape. Or if you are utilizing trees to restore the broader landscape, you really have to be careful not to create a thick forest, because fire then becomes a very challenging piece of the puzzle to manage. However, there are locations in these landscapes that are treed, and those are generally the riparian corridors. And so, that becomes, cottonwoods and American plum, willows, and other sorts of riparian trees. And these are the really kind of, water-rich portions of the landscape in the Intermountain West. Or you get to higher elevations where you go into, pine and fir and stuff, but then you start to get, that's, not the desert area, that's a higher rainfall regime. So, for the context that I'm working in mostly, it's really, you want to be careful proposing that should become a forested landscape, because you run into the fire challenges. And I'm mostly using trees in my situation in kind of nooks and pockets in the landscape where they can thrive, or with some supplemental irrigation specific to homesteads or other sorts of applications where we're trying to get food out of the tree crops rather than just reforesting a desert landscape. So when you start to get to the drier deserts, the warmer deserts, sorry, not the drier deserts, the warmer deserts at lower latitudes, then trees become much more important. But the cold desert is kind of a very specific and unique situation.
Awesome.
Thanks, TJ. Sorry, Jay. One quick follow-up. I'll post a video about it. Neil actually made a video kind of about that, like the Al Beta project, where they're trying to use agroforestry in Saudi Arabia, where there is almost no rain, maybe one rainfall event every 3 years. But they managed to, like establish some trees there in a complete desert landscape. They're trying to establish moringa was kind of their aim, and through water infiltration, they're kind of making it happen. So I'll send you a video about Neil's perspective on that. Neil Spackman. Yeah, it's two Neils, both are awesome. Neil Bertrando, Neil Spackman. So I'll put that in the chat box.
Awesome. So we'll take this last question to be done here in the next couple of minutes. Gail, love seeing what you are all doing, and I can see a lot of places you're working are urban or domestic. Are there larger projects where anyone is working with reintroducing animals, especially herbivores, into these landscapes in order to help aggregate the soils to help rainfall infiltration, using the idea that ecosystems evolve simultaneously with animals? Gail, what I'll get you to do is I'll get you to go over to the landing page for the course. Neil, Jeff, and I have recorded, I think we're on to 12 or 13 different case studies. And there's a case study about a pasture that Jeff worked on that I think would help answer that question. But gents, last question for the day. What's your thoughts?
I think the animals can be really beneficial and really destructive to the landscape, and it's really critical to have them well managed, and that can be really difficult and tricky and complicated, and really comes down to the personal and social pieces of the puzzle more than the design piece. So that's it is being done. I'm not personally involved in any projects where we're using large animals. The Riverside County project that I worked on a few years ago, they were using sheep grazing for fire mitigation as an alternative to mowing, and they were having some success with that and some challenges with that. Due to the challenges associated with managing animals, that basically they had a hired grazer who would leave them on certain areas a little bit too long and munch it back down to bare ground. And so it was fire control, but it wasn't necessarily restoring the landscape in some areas. In other areas, he was able to get them off earlier and allow the litter layer to be left. So the question comes down to one of being able to manage animals effectively and being able to monitor that you're actually restoring watershed processes. For example, that you're leaving litter or mulch material on the soil surface to slow and infiltrate water into the landscape. And people are doing this, things like techniques like bale grazing, where they'll throw down a big bale and have animals in the area for a small portion of time, which is very similar to the fish scale mulch. Actually creates a vertical mulch. The stamping of the hoofs nicks and compacts the mulch into the soil and creates little water catchment reservoirs. But again, it's very it can be tricky, and really you have to have everyone on board to do it. And so the people managing the animals need to be really integrated in the process and on board with how the outcomes that you want to see happen for it to be effective, in my experience.
Jeff, anything to add?
I think Neil summed it up really good. Does really come down to the management, and on some projects that we've done, there have been cattle present and large herds of elk, and so that's actually led us to modify our structures a bit and actually build them even more robust, because the impacts of hoof shear can be beneficial in some instances, but they can also undermine your structures in other instances. So we just kind of need to be aware of what those stressors are, and it really does come down to the management activities and how actively the animals are being managed, so that we can maximize their beneficial impacts while minimizing any negative or adverse impacts.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jeff. Before I pass this over to Raleigh, I just want to give a big thanks to everybody who showed up to the call today. There are some incredible individuals who are doing phenomenal work on the call, and they're not the ones who are speaking today. And I'm just so thrilled to see Natalie and Minnie and Jeremiah and Carl, like just some exceptional folks. So huge thanks to everyone who showed up. Thank you very much, Neil and Jeff, for the work you do and being willing to spend some time to be on a computer to share it with everyone. I know both of you would rather be on a shovel, and I hear you. So I really do. Jeff's face is great. I would. If you are interested in this course, we would love to have you in it. That code works until Sunday at midnight. It would be great to have you in the course. There was a question about in-person courses. I know Neil and Jeff are considering those in the new year. So great to send out. I will resend the code. I've just been asked to resend the code, so I will do that right now. The last thing I was going to say is so much of this work can all be done in small incremental steps, and you can learn and can grow. And it's just such a pleasure to be able to share this with everybody. So thank you again, Neil, for hosting us. It was such a great conversation. And if folks are interested, we'll be hosting another conversation like this with Raleigh, all about family food in January. So the link's up, and I pass it over to you, Raleigh.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for doing this. Another great sustainable design masterclass webinar. We're going to do focus a lot on watershed restoration. So this is the first and many great webinars we're going to do. We're going to just schedule a webinar with Natalie. We did a great previous webinar with her years ago on her work on the Mediterranean region. Now we're following up years later and seeing what she's been doing along with Warren Brush. And that's going to be exciting. I just scheduled that with her for late January, so that'll be fun. And we're going to have one with Todd Harrington coming up, and we're going to do something. We're going to do a little program on his work regenerating soil and using extracts and vermicompost and other exciting things. So keep a look in your inboxes. Everyone's getting the replay after this, and it's also going to be hosted on Javin's site. So you'll have 2 ways to check it out. And yeah, I hope you have a great day. Just anything you can do in the water, volunteer, advocate for beavers, help these guys, do whatever you can. It's all fantastic. And appreciate taking your time to learn about water, to learn about Neil and Jeff and Javin's great work, and appreciate you all being here. I guess I'll take it away. Natalie's saying, where is the replay? You'll get it in your inbox. And Javin just posted that code. All right, y'all. Well, have a fantastic weekend and talk to y'all soon. Peace, everybody.